So there are things I'm looking for. So for instance, with Japanese stocks, I tend to look for businesses that are not burning a lot of cash. They don't have to be profitable. Actually, unprofitable net nets tend to outperform profitable net nets, interestingly enough, and companies that pay dividends underperform companies that don't pay dividends from a basket approach. But, they're not burning a lot of cash. They're not selling stock. That's like a huge red flag if you see a stock trading below net cash and they're selling stock. And then typically too, so, another red flag is, say, if they have a lot of their main operations might be in China. It doesn't mean anything inherently, but by avoiding, say, Japanese stocks with large operations in China, I'm removing a lot of fraud risk. And I've just seen Chinese fraud where you can just get killed and it looked optically cheap until they went to zero.
So I guess keeping in the Far East,
yeah,
we talked a little bit about off air before we came on about Charlie Munger and some of his thoughts on China.
Yeah.
So do you want to touch on that live wire?
Yeah,
or what are your thoughts on that?
No, sure. I mean, if you look at China over the last few decades, right, look, the news cycle is always, especially today, right, the news cycle is very clickbaity. It's always, how can I have the most negative headline possible to get the most clicks?
It bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. So typically when you read anything about China, it's usually pretty bad, that they're doing something corrupt. And the truth is, like, there's a lot of stuff that China does that's pretty bad. But there's a lot of stuff they have done that's pretty good. Especially it's become a lot more of a capitalistic society. There's been, I don't know the numbers, but the amount of people that have been taken out of poverty over the last few decades is staggering. So China is in a much better position financially, and the people have a much better standard of living on average today than they did 30 or 40 years ago. And I think that trend is just continuing, but it's going to take time, right? I mean, they're much newer to markets than the United States is. So I think generally I agree with Charlie Munger that China has a great future ahead of it. But you'll also notice that Charlie's most of his Chinese investments are done through a fund managed by Li Lu, yep. Who is knows Chinese. He is Chinese and knows the culture and is able to have a much better boots on the ground understanding of China. And I think you need more of that, because I mean, I have seen situations. I'll tell you a story, actually. So when was this? This might have been like 2000, maybe like 2006, 2007. And I had invested in a company called China Media Express. And they had, their business was they made billboards for like buses, so if you like see those buses and large advertisements. And why I invested in them is that, they were very profitable, huge returns on equity. I'm talking like 40, 50% returns on equity, large growth rates, and they were significantly more profitable and higher ROEs, higher margins than all their competitors. Also traded below net cash. So I was like, this is a no-brainer. And there was some large investor that was well known that was also invested in the company, so it made me feel a little bit better. And it just got weird. It was like, oh, why is the thing trading below net cash? What's going on here? And I had called. If you went on their website, they had all their clients, and one of them was Coca-Cola. So I called. Investor relations for Coca-Cola, and I didn't really know who to leave a message for, but I was just saying, hey, there's a company I'm invested in. Supposedly you're a client. Just wanted some, more light on the relationship. Oh, excuse me. And the head of marketing for Coca-Cola called me back, and she said, we haven't heard of this company. But that doesn't inherently mean we're not working with them. It could be one of like our local, Chinese bottling companies that works with them. I will look into it and see if there's any, sort of local Coca-Cola related companies that might be working with them. She calls me back 2 weeks later, says, no, I can't get in touch with anyone in China that knows this business. So I'm like, okay, that's strange. And I sold the stock right after I heard this. I was like, that freaked me out. And then there was a Seeking Alpha article of some guy who like had went to China, and he was a shareholder, and he went to headquarters to like meet with the CEO, and he like walks in, and there's like a few people sitting around playing like ping pong, but like no one's doing any work. And he was just like, what, or it was pool or whatever, but it did not compute to him like what was going on. Like, how could this be a real business?
Right.
Anyway, it turned out the entire thing was a fraud. To the point that they faked the cash in their bank account. So the cash wasn't even real.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's an extreme example, right? But you see Chinese frauds all the time. And I actually did some research into Chinese netnets, and I was thinking, well, maybe, if you bought a basket, right, it takes in, the fact is maybe you're getting paid to take on that risk. Because as value investors, sometimes, right, just kind of like unprofitable netnets do better than profitable netnets. So I thought maybe Chinese netnets actually do incredible, and you have a few frauds, but the other ones go up 1,000%. Well, it turns out that owning a portfolio of netnets, if you exclude China, you do better. So
that's funny.
Right. So it's just hard. I think if you're not on the ground, because there is still a lot of fraud. If you're not in China or speak Chinese or have connections in China, it just makes the game harder. And I think there's other opportunities that aren't as hard, and that you don't get bonus points for making harder investments. So I avoid China, but generally I'm bullish on the country of China. I just, as an investor, I don't invest in China.
So what do you think of like the Alibabas and the Tencents and any of that kind of stuff? What are your thoughts on any of those companies?
Yeah, I mean, they seem good. I don't know. I'm actually reading a book right now on the founder of Alibaba, but I don't know if that's gonna help me or not,
Right.
with an investment. But I just think it's interesting. But I would imagine, right, Charlie speaks to Li Lu all the time. I would imagine there's probably some insight that he has.
Yeah.
When Charlie Munger said it's just a replacement for cash, of course he's, Charlie being Charlie, he's going to play it down. He's not going to just buy any random company as a replacement for cash, right? He's not,
right.
So obviously there's something he likes about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember reading this was less than 12 months ago, probably. It was not just some small no-name Chinese company either. It was Luckin. What was it? Luckin Coffee.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's awful. The fraud that they had with that. And I guess there was some boots on the ground firm that was kind of checking in on the company's numbers. And they're like, there's no way, like even just looking outside of these coffee restaurants, there's no way that with the flow of traffic that they're getting anywhere near what they were reporting. So this is not just like a 1 or 2 off thing. This is a big thing. And what's sad is that was one of the companies I saw a lot around the internet of people saying, get in on this. This is the Starbucks of China.
Right.
And it completely blew up. It's awful.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, could you imagine if like Starbucks all of a sudden one day went away, or McDonald's? It's like, that's not going to happen.
Right.
Oh.
Well, everybody wants to call the SEC the bad guy, but there are good things to having those kind of regulations in place.
Sure.
Which, for me personally makes me kind of timid about going outside of the US, but at the same time, like you're saying, if there's countries where that's not a problem, like Japan,
it really is not as much.
Yeah,
I mean, with Japan specifically, if you were committing financial fraud in Japan, it would be a very dishonorable thing.
Right.
And there's certain social clout by running a public company in Japan. So, but a lot of these companies, they're not being run for shareholders, they're being run for longevity.